Welcome to Pretty Lies and Alibis. Let's seek the truth and travel the long road to justice together. What you know, Alibiers, welcome to another episode of Pretty Lies and Alibis. I'm Gigi. Good to have you here. It's Tuesday. We just got finished with closings in the Ashley Benefield trial. We are officially on verdict watch. We're going to break down some of the closings, but before we get started, you know the drill. If you're watching on YouTube, don't forget to hit subscribe if you haven't already. Like the video, share it with your friends, and you can ring my bell if you want notifications of when I post new content. Just click that little bell icon. Music fact of the day. What is the biggest selling country single of all time? Johnny Cash, I Walk the Line. What a good song. Never gets old. Well, we had closings. They just wrapped up. They were very, very lengthy on all sides. So I'm not going to go word for word. I'm really going to hit what I thought were the most important parts that both sides brought up. When we have a verdict, I will do a YouTube short. So be sure to hit that bell notification if you want updates of when I post even new shorts to announce stuff like this. Moving forward, after a verdict in this trial, I'm getting the new Donna Adelson documents today or tomorrow. My plan for the next week or so is to deep dive into those and put everything out there that's in there. It should be good. For rebuttal, they called Eva up really quickly and asked one question. Was your dad left or right-handed? She said right-handed. They showed two photos, one from 2018 and then another taken on a boat in August of 2020. That was the end of it. And I was thinking why, but you find out later on in the state's closings why they asked Eva this very question. Now, the jury can consider lesser charges, manslaughter. I think this could be a little bit of a lengthy deliberation. Then again, juries are unpredictable and sometimes come back quickly. So we'll see. The state starts out by saying that domestic violence is a real problem and that there's many men and women in horrendous situations, people who feel they can't get out and they have no way to get out. But that was not this defendant and never was. Some may be justified when they have to use self-defense to kill their abuser, but not this defendant. She used domestic violence and allegations of it to progress her goal, which was sole custody of that child at all cost. They go through a timeline. September 7th, 2016, married after 13 days with a 30-year age gap. Shortly after the marriage, Ashley says there's controlling behavior and name calling. April 15th, 2017. Doug has a vasectomy reversal. The angry outbursts, according to Ashley, begin around this time. Doug acknowledges his wrongdoings and apologizes. But just days after, there's a lavish wedding reception where everybody seems happy. And then 3 months later, Ashley gets pregnant and moves to her mother's in Florida. That's the last moment she lived with Doug in August of 2017. When she gets to Florida, she starts a series of complaints to get sole custody. She files for an injunction in South Carolina while living in Florida, and she's not living with Doug. It's a mutual injunction. The judge found no evidence of fault, and both sides agreed they would not contact each other. Then she starts a series of complaints in Florida. He violates the South Carolina injunction, and he's poisoning me and our unborn child, and then goes back to give examples of things he did in South Carolina. Doug's lawyer contacts her so that he can be a part of the child's birth. She doesn't respond and goes early to give birth and doesn't tell Doug for weeks and doesn't put his name on the birth certificate. Instead, she gives the child her maiden name. 1 month later, she starts the complaints to law enforcement saying Doug violated the injunction in South Carolina and then asks the state of Florida for a new one. When she went to law enforcement to get them to file criminal charges, law enforcement was not on her side. You heard the conversations she had. It's the entire crux of the case. It's her motive, plan, and why she did it all. He said her motive was to use the criminal court system to get custody of their child. Law enforcement was uncomfortable with it. The detective forwarded that to the state attorney, and they did not file charges. She was furious and said to arrest him in family court in front of the judge. In 20 years, he had never had anyone ask him to do that. On the phone, she went from crying to aggressive, screeching at the top of her lungs because he wouldn't go along. She said, "You will effing arrest him in front of the judge, and I will make sure you do. I'll do anything I have to do to keep my baby, a hole." Not, "I'm so afraid of this man. I'm a victim of domestic violence." She wants to keep her baby, and she's afraid this man, who is 30 years older, more established, with more resources, will get custody instead of her. September 2018, the second hearing for the injunction. All the allegations of poisoning, and still she fails. The judge said no, and Doug will have immediate visitation. The baby was 6 months old, and Doug had never met her. The first visitation, all of a sudden, everything's fine. Ashley wants to go with him, tells him we're going to get back together because the court wasn't working, and she worried Doug would get the child. She played on Doug's wishes to have his family together. A year of peace follows, and in September 2019, almost a year later, Doug finds out Ashley is dating someone else and files for divorce. And then a series of complaints starts against Doug, saying he's abusing the child. It was investigated and not a single charge was filed. May 1st of 2020, after she failed in the criminal system, she files another injunction. A few days later, Doug files for sole custody of the child, her biggest fear. What happens? All of a sudden, she's not a victim and we're getting back together. Let's go to marriage counseling. But behind his back, she's saying, "No way am I getting back with him." They go on social outings. They go to the beach, to the movies, to lunch. They go to swim at his pool. She's giving Doug mixed signals. She was waiting for an opportunity to strike. June 1st, 2020. The legal system sends them both for an evaluation, and her deception continues. Towards the end of September 2020, she has a meeting with the doctor, and she's upset because this isn't going fast enough. We need to move to Maryland. Then she says, "I'll take matters into my own hands." And that was days before he's murdered. September 21st, 2020, she goes to mediation with Doug, and they end it saying, "We're going to drop everything." On September 30th, these things were going to be heard, as well as a joint motion to release the report. But Ashley had no intention of dropping the injunction. Look at the text the week before. They talk about everything being dropped. Call this attorney. You do this. Ashley knew it wasn't true. Her attorney said, "We are not dropping it," and they were moving forward. Ashley knew the 30th it would be over. Her charade would be over. They didn't live together for 3 years before the homicide. If there was violence to her in South Carolina, that was 3 years before, and they hadn't lived together since. Was it necessary to shoot and kill him? No. The state goes on to really do yesterday what they did on Cross with that wheel of domestic violence, pointing out she lived on her own, had a cell phone, had her own car, wasn't financially dependent on Doug. The state goes on to say, even if you feel Doug's behavior in South Carolina was inexcusable, remember, that's 3 years prior. Nothing happened between then and the date of the shooting. Check off all the things you can agree on: that the death was caused by Ashley. She had an indifference to human life. Pulling the trigger 4 times is an indifference to human life. Ill will is a low threshold. Devising a plan to keep Doug away from the child, filing fake complaints, no charges ever filed. Is that ill will? Yes. They talk about the lesser offense. The state advised them to start with the highest charge, and whatever jurors agree on, if it's beyond a reasonable doubt, she's not entitled to self-defense. You don't even go to manslaughter. You only go to manslaughter if you don't agree on the highest charge. The real question, was there self-defense? Was it justifiable? They move on to the date of the shooting and point out that they're both getting along. They have texted that whole week before. Ashley was acting nice and seemingly wanting to reconcile, moving together, using the same truck. He was coming to the house to help her move. They went to mediation 3 days before she killed him and dropped everything, and they were moving. But moving with Doug wasn't Ashley's plan. Doug had a right to be there the night he was shot and killed. She invited him over and texts back and forth show she let him in the gate and did numerous times before. She wasn't afraid because she let him over. And mom wasn't afraid for her daughter because when Doug arrives, she leaves for the park with their child. There's one person alive who knows what happened. She made herself a witness, and you will judge her credibility and see if it matches the evidence. They point out when Ashley was on the stand, she became evasive if it was difficult, especially on cross. The first was, I don't know, or the other crying, but did you ever see one tear, one drop of liquid come out of her eye? Did you see her eyes red or swollen? She had a breakdown and we had to take a break. When she retakes the stand, her eyes are fine. They're not red. Is she conveying the truth or her version of events? She said during the move, Doug bumped her shoulder a couple of times, and then he carries a box that he rams into her. Does that scratch look like a scratch from a box? Wouldn't there be a bruise there? State says they look like cat scratches. Ashley said when they were by the front door, Doug grabbed her by the wrist and hit her in the head. I asked, was his hand open or closed? She doesn't know. She should know if a grown man balled up his fist and hit her, she would have had a lot more damage. 4 people saw her after the incident. The neighbor, who saw no injuries, her clothes were not disheveled. The deputy who put her in the squad car didn't see injuries. The crime scene tech took photos, saw no swelling of the face. 3 days later, more photos taken to see if any injuries show up, but nothing. She said her eye was droopy and swollen. They go on to show 4 photos of Ashley. The first was the black and white photo that I've been using on the thumbnail on YouTube. The second was from the night of the shooting. The third was 3 days later. And then another was 5 to 6 weeks later. The state asked, does it look like her face is swollen? They show a floor plan, talk about where Ashley went when she could have gone out the door. She turned right and went into an empty room with a mattress, a broom, a hamper, and 2 handguns. As she's getting the firearm, he slams the door open and she sees him standing there. When I asked her to show me what he was doing, I don't know. He was in a fighter stance, but I don't know what fighters do. She said his hands were moving around. She said, I'm there with a gun pointed at him and he lunges at me. She had the gun and she's pointing it at him and he takes a fighting stance. He's right-handed. What would you do? When you get back to the jury room, try it. What side would be pointed away? Your strong hand. If he lunges, he's facing her, but the bullet went into his side. Their own expert turned sideways when asked about the trajectory. Is he skipping to her? The hands that were up were likely a defensive stance. They show the trajectory photo, a front and back view that shows it just going straight through from the side to the other. And then they point out the legs and show 2 possible scenarios of how his legs could have been. One with his back on the floor and the legs up, and the other on his knees with the shot coming from lower. You heard the expert say he would have needed to fall back over something because her story doesn't match the evidence. She's trying to manipulate the system and she's trying to manipulate you. The physical evidence does not show Doug coming at her. When she runs to the neighbor, she never says, get an ambulance. She doesn't tell her mom a word, never tells her what happens. She lives with a friend for 9 months, never tells what happens. She sat here and said Doug never touched her, kicked her, punched her, came at her with anything. She was the only one armed, not Doug. After she shot him, she got what she wanted, sole custody, and that is murder. And that was pretty much it for the state's case. It went on a lot longer. I'm just not going to rehash it because it's really all things that have been talked about in court. But the defense says there have been distortions of the truth, and it's been a flawed prosecution, and says they can demonstrate that with 2 of the state's witnesses, Doug's attorney, Stephanie Murphy. On cross, I showed what the state's theory was, that the report was being released 3 days later. He also refers the jury to the emails that the hearing was not about that psychiatric evaluation being released on the 30th and said there was no scheduled date for it. Another flaw is Detective Gilliam. He said the South Carolina injunction was not in effect when Doug sent Ashley the tea. It went into effect November 3rd. He also tells you word for word without writing a word of it in his report. And 600 cases later, exactly what Ashley said to him on the phone. He countered the arrest warrant the other deputy wrote. He remanded it and said he would refer it to the state's attorney office. It was a good old boy network, and they liked Doug. What was in the psychiatric report Ashley was so afraid of that she killed Doug? The doctor said that she had no violent tendencies. The only concern, according to the doctor, was she was afraid if Doug found out, he would take out on the child his frustration of the psych report. If the child was the reason, then why not kill him when the judge gave him visitation? She filed complaint after complaint with no result. So she kills him? That's a leap. You need evidence that supports that theory. You don't see searches on how to kill. You see her searching how to co-parent with an abusive spouse. Doug was a sick guy, and her actions on the day of the shooting were justified. They bring up Doug in the past threatening self-harm to his wife who passed away, Renee, as well as to Ashley, and also the text message from Renee where she says Doug abused her on their honeymoon. Mentions Doug hurting the family dog, throwing the cat down the stairs, putting a tracker on Ashley's car, neighbors seeing him in the yard. They talk about Doug hearing two guys speaking in the background while Ashley is on the cruise. That puts him in a murderous mood. And at 24, she thinks it's flattering. He violated the injunction, drove from South Carolina to Florida to follow her. That is determination and obsession. Mentions Doug looking at the home right behind Ashley and says is sick. She left him a letter when she left South Carolina recounting some of the things he did, like shooting the gun and punching the dog, as part of her reasoning. Dr. Quintel said Doug was super controlling, jealous, intimidating, and an alpha male. Ashley will put herself in danger to protect her child. Yet the state argues Ashley is happy going along with Doug, but we know from the domestic violence expert that is compliance mode. They text in the week of the murder. Video in the restaurant, it appears Ashley is happy when she's really quite scared. You go along to get along. He also says nobody testified that Doug filed for sole custody. He brings up the medical examiner said the shot was front to back. He says the state claims it side to side. Michael Haig testified there were 4 shots fired, and his 3D diagram showed you where the shooting took place. The state said if Doug was running away, that's how you get the shot in the back of the leg. But she would have to be on the floor to shoot him in that area. Ashley's explanation was consistent with the physical evidence. The medical examiner, Dr. Liu, who always testifies for the state, came and testified for the defense. And why do you think that is? Eva, Doug's daughter, told us he was skilled in martial arts and skilled in disarming weapons. He lunges to grab the weapon. These shots had no pattern. They're random, an indication of someone firing in a panic. Look at the photos and you will see swelling and redness. This was Doug's last hope for any reconciliation, and that is the most dangerous time for a victim of domestic violence. She says she's done packing for the night. He rams a box into her. She apologizes, but Ashley's had enough, and she tries to leave. He catches up to her and grabs her by the hand, blocking the door. Ashley finds the inner strength to yell, "I'm done, you need to leave now." She had the right to use deadly force if she believed necessary to prevent imminent death or great bodily harm, or the imminent commission of burglary, false imprisonment, or aggravated assault against herself. He had permission to be there, but it was withdrawn. That's burglary. She tried to leave. That's false imprisonment. Forcible felony, aggravated assault through threats and intimidation. He committed aggravated assault. If she staged this crime scene, you're going to check to be sure it supports your version of events, or you're off to prison. She left in less than 30 seconds. I walked hand in hand with Ashley for several years. I'm going to surrender her fate to you. So back to the state, they come back in for the last word. If law enforcement didn't have enough evidence to arrest Doug, it's not the good old boy network. That's the law. She's so scared, but can you buy me boxes? Doug isn't on trial. Ashley is. Don't get distracted by emails that showed you nothing. This 5'9" ninja that wears an adult small t shirt. This isn't a hulking beast, and the state contends he made mistakes. The biggest being trying to maintain this relationship that resulted in his death. He did outrageous things, but he never hit her. 3 years apart. Look at the text that week. Read our version because that's a complete conversation. The murderous intent, she admitted to Doug her ex choked her while being intimate. It's the context. Look at the text that week, playing a game, laughing it up in a video. No abuse reported in 3 years. The doctor met with Ashley Moore, and her version of events is the one he hears. Ashley asked Doug, "Are you dating her?" when Stephanie was with him on the first visitation visit, and he was jealous. She tried to terminate his parental rights. The judge said no. What did she do? Dictates how he sees the baby. I'm going to go back. I'll be sweet. I think Ashley was the one in the cycle. There was more in between there, but that's kind of the best parts of it, really. It was very long. It took pretty much all afternoon. We were back at 12:30. We just wrapped up, I'd say around 4 o'clock-ish. So you can see it was very long-winded on both sides, but her life is on the line as far as prison goes, and to the state, justice for Doug is on the line as well. So I don't mind if openings and closings are long. We will see what happens. As soon as there's a verdict, I'll put a YouTube short out. I'm still live. I will be going live every day until we have a verdict. Will it be quick? Will it be long? Only time will tell. But in the meantime, hope you guys have a good rest of your evening. We'll see you tomorrow.